The cemetery was silent, the kind of quiet that pressed against Ethan Collins' chest like a weight he couldn't shake. The sky was a dull gray, matching the numbness inside him as he stared at the two freshly dug graves in front of him. His parents, gone in an instant. A car accident, the police had said. No warning, no last words. Just gone. Ethan clutched the framed photograph in his hands, his fingers trembling against the cold glass. It was their last family portrait, taken just a few months ago. His father's stern but kind eyes, his mother's warm smile. Now, just memories. He hadn't cried yet. Not when he got the call, not when he identified their bodies, not even now, standing in front of their caskets. The pain was too deep, too heavy, like a storm locked inside him with no way out. Beside him, his wife, Vanessa, stood stiffly, her designer black dress perfectly pressed, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. She hadn't shed a single tear since the accident. Instead, she had busied herself with funeral arrangements, speaking in clipped tones to the guests, as if this were just another social event. Ethan had told himself she was just being strong for him, but now, as the last of the mourners drifted away, she turned to him with an expression that made his stomach twist. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp, like a knife cutting through the heavy air. Ethan blinked, barely registering her words. "Now?" His own voice sounded hollow, distant. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded stack of papers. "I want a divorce." The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back slightly, his breath catching. "What?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're broke, Ethan. I saw the accounts, the debts. You're drowning, and I won't go down with you." She thrust the papers toward him, her perfectly manicured nails glinting in the dim light. Ethan's mind spun. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Vanessa didn't wait for a response. She dropped the divorce papers onto the grass beside his parents' graves, turned on her heel, and walked away, her expensive shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth with every step. Ethan stood frozen, watching her go, the cold wind biting at his skin. But then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed a figure approaching, a man in a dark suit, someone he hadn't seen among the mourners earlier. The man stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Collins," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for your loss, but there's something you need to see." He held out a sealed envelope, and in that moment, Ethan had no idea that his life was about to change forever. Ethan stared at the envelope, his fingers numb. The man in the suit didn't move, didn't speak again, just waited, his gaze steady. The wind rustled the edges of the paper as if urging Ethan to take it. "Who are you?" Ethan finally managed to ask, his voice rough. "David Mercer," the man replied. "Your parents' lawyer." Ethan frowned. He had met his parents' legal team before, but this man was unfamiliar. David seemed to sense his confusion. "I handled their private affairs," he explained. "The ones they didn't discuss with anyone." Ethan's chest tightened. His parents had always been private people, especially about money. They had built their business from nothing, always cautious, always prepared. But this? A lawyer appearing at their funeral with a mysterious envelope. It felt like something out of a movie. With shaking hands, Ethan took the envelope. It was heavier than he expected, the paper thick and expensive. His name was written on the front in his father's precise handwriting. Just seeing it made his throat close up. David gave a small nod. "Read it when you're alone." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rows of headstones. Ethan stood there, the envelope burning in his grip. He glanced toward the parking lot where Vanessa was already sliding into her car, not once looking back. The divorce papers lay abandoned on the grass, fluttering slightly in the breeze. He bent down, picked them up, and stuffed them into his coat pocket without reading them. Then, with one last look at his parents' graves, he turned and walked to his own car, an old sedan, the only one left in the lot. The drive home was a blur. His mind raced, replaying Vanessa's cold words, the way she had looked at him, like he was nothing, like the last 5 years of their marriage had meant nothing. When he finally stepped into their empty house, the silence was suffocating. No laughter, no voices, just the faint hum of the refrigerator. He didn't bother turning on the lights. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, the envelope in front of him, and took a deep breath. Then he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a smaller sealed envelope marked, "For your eyes only." The letter was in his father's handwriting, and as Ethan began to read, his heart pounded harder with every word. "Son, if you're reading this, then we're gone. And if Vanessa has left you, then she has failed the test." Ethan's breath caught. Test? We knew her true nature might reveal itself one day. Money changes people, or shows who they really are. So we made sure you would be protected. His hands trembled as he read on. "The debts you saw? Fabricated. The accounts, Vanessa. Checked? Part of the plan. We needed to know if she would stand by you when you had nothing." Ethan's vision blurred. His parents had planned this? The last line made his stomach drop. "Open the second envelope. Then you'll understand everything." Ethan set the letter down, his pulse roaring in his ears. He picked up the smaller envelope, his fingers clumsy as he broke the seal. Inside was a single key and a note with 3 words. "Go to the vault." Ethan turned the key over in his palm, its cold metal pressing into his skin. A vault? His parents had never mentioned anything about a vault. His mind raced. Was this some kind of safety deposit box? A hidden room in their old house? The note didn't give any clues. He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back with a sharp scrape against the floor. His parents had always been meticulous, deliberate. If they left him a key, they would have left a way for him to find where it belonged. Then it hit him. His father's study. Ethan hadn't stepped foot in there since the accident. The thought of seeing his father's empty chair, his untouched desk, made his chest ache. But he forced himself to move, his footsteps heavy as he walked down the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had been inside recently. Ethan pushed it open, the familiar scent of leather and old books wrapping around him like a ghost. Everything was exactly as his father had left it. Neat stacks of papers, a half-empty coffee mug, the antique globe he used to spin absently while thinking. Ethan's eyes landed on the painting behind the desk, a landscape of the mountains where his parents had first met. His father had always loved that painting. Something made him step closer. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the frame. Then, on instinct, he lifted it slightly and heard a quiet click. The painting swung forward, revealing a small wall safe behind it. Ethan's breath caught. He had grown up in this house, played in this study as a child, and yet he never knew this was here. The key fit perfectly into the lock. With a slow turn, the safe door opened. Inside was a single black folder, thick with documents. Ethan pulled it out, his hands unsteady as he flipped it open. The first page was a legal document. The Collins Family Trust. His eyes scanned the words, his pulse pounding louder with each line. Upon the passing of both Richard and Margaret, Collins, full control of all assets, including the estate, business holdings, and investments, shall transfer to Ethan James Collins. Provided. He fulfills the following condition. His spouse, if married at the time of inheritance, must remain loyal in the event of financial hardship. Ethan's throat tightened. They had tested Vanessa, and she had failed. Beneath the trust documents were bank statements, real ones, account balances that made his head spin, properties, stocks, a fortune that had been hidden in plain sight. But the last page wasn't a legal document, it was a handwritten letter from his mother. "Ethan, my love, if you're reading this, then you've seen the truth. We never wanted to doubt Vanessa, but we had to be sure. Money changes people. And if she walked away when she thought you had nothing, then she never deserved you." Ethan's vision blurred. "You were always enough, just as you are. And now you'll never have to doubt who truly loves you. The money is yours. But more importantly, so is your freedom." A single tear fell onto the paper. Then, from downstairs, the front door slammed open. Vanessa's voice rang through the house. "Ethan, we need to talk." Ethan froze, his mother's letter still clutched in his hands. Vanessa wasn't supposed to come back, not after what she'd done, not after handing him divorce papers at his parents' funeral. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood, floors downstairs echoing through the silent house. "Ethan," she called again, her voice tight with impatience. Quickly, he shoved the documents back into the safe, locked it, and swung the painting back into place just as her footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The study door flew open before he could turn around. "There you are," Vanessa said, her arms crossed. She hadn't even changed out of her funeral dress, but her makeup was freshly touched up, her lips a perfect shade of crimson, as if she hadn't just shattered his world hours earlier. Ethan forced himself to face her. "What are you doing here?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "We're not done talking. You didn't sign the papers." He stared at her, his chest burning. "You handed them to me at my parents' graves, Vanessa. What did you expect?" She stepped farther into the room, her eyes scanning the study, lingering a second too long on the painting behind him. A flicker of suspicion crossed her face before she smoothed it away. "I expected you to be reasonable," she said coolly. "You're broke. I'm not staying tied to a sinking ship." Ethan clenched his jaw. She had no idea. No idea about the safe, the trust, the fortune that was now his. No idea that his parents had known she'd do this, but he wasn't ready to tell her. "Not yet. You didn't even wait a day," he said quietly. Vanessa shrugged. "Why pretend? It's not like you can fight this. You can't afford a lawyer, and I've already filed." A bitter smile tugged at his lips. "You're that sure of yourself, huh?" Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ethan said nothing, just held her gaze. For the first time, Vanessa hesitated. She glanced around the room again, her confidence wavering. "You're hiding something," she muttered. He almost laughed. "You have no idea." Then her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, scowled at the screen, and typed a quick reply before shoving it back into her purse. "Whatever, just sign the papers by tomorrow, or I'll make this ugly." She turned on her heel and strode out, her perfume lingering in the air like a taunt. Ethan waited until he heard the front door slam before letting out a shaky breath. This wasn't over, not even close. The moment Vanessa's car peeled out of the driveway, Ethan grabbed his coat and headed straight for his parents' old law firm. If there was anyone who could help him navigate this nightmare, it was David Mercer, the man who had handed him the envelope at the cemetery. The drive downtown was a blur of honking cars and flashing traffic lights, his mind replaying Vanessa's words like a broken record. "You're broke. I'm not staying tied to a sinking ship." She had been so sure of herself, so cold. But now, with the truth burning in his pocket, the game had changed. The law office was exactly as he remembered. A sleek, modern building with his parents' name etched in polished granite near the entrance. The receptionist recognized him immediately, her professional smile faltering when she saw the shadows under his eyes. "Mr. Collins," she said softly. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Ethan nodded, too exhausted for small talk. "I need to see David. Mercer. Now." 5 minutes later, he was seated in a quiet conference room, the same black folder from the safe spread across the mahogany table. David sat across from him, fingers steepled, watching as Ethan finally let the dam break. She came back, Ethan said, his voice rough. Acted like she hadn't just asked for a divorce at my parents' funeral, like she hadn't left. David didn't look surprised. Vanessa always was. Strategic, Ethan scoffed. That's one word for it. He tapped the trust documents. You knew about this. You helped them set it up. David sighed. Your parents loved you, Ethan, but they'd seen too many people ruined by greed, especially after money. They wanted to protect you. By lying to me? By making me think I was bankrupt? By making sure the woman you married loved you, David corrected. Not your last name, not your family's money. He leaned forward. And now you know the truth. Ethan exhaled sharply. So, what happens now? David slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Now, he said, we make sure Vanessa gets exactly what she deserves. The document was a motion to freeze all marital assets, effective immediately. Ethan's lips curved into a slow, dark smile. Vanessa wanted a divorce? Fine. But she wasn't getting a single cent. Ethan spent the next few hours in a whirlwind of legal strategy, sitting across from David Mercer as they meticulously combed through every clause, every contingency, every loophole in the trust documents that would ensure Vanessa walked away with nothing. The more he learned, the more he realized just how far ahead his parents had planned. Every possible scenario had been accounted for, every legal safeguard put in place to protect him from exactly this kind of betrayal. The so-called debts Vanessa had discovered were nothing more than carefully constructed decoys, dummy accounts set up under shell corporations to test her loyalty. The real money, the sprawling estate, the lucrative business holdings, the offshore investments, had been locked away, completely invisible to her, accessible only after his parents' passing and only if he met the conditions of the trust. And now, with Vanessa's true colors revealed, the full weight of his inheritance was his to claim. David's pen scratched across paper as he drafted the legal response to Vanessa's divorce filing, his voice calm but edged with quiet satisfaction as he explained how Vanessa's own greed had played right into their hands, because by filing for divorce based on financial abandonment, she had unknowingly triggered a clause that nullified any claim she might have had to the Collins fortune. Ethan listened, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table as the reality of the situation settled over him. This wasn't just about money. This was about justice. His parents had seen through Vanessa long before he had, and now, with their final act, they had given him the power to rewrite the ending of his own story. The days that followed were a blur of legal motions and quiet victories, each step bringing Ethan closer to the moment he had both dreaded and longed for. The final confrontation with Vanessa. David had been relentless, filing injunction after injunction to freeze their joint accounts, halt the sale of any shared assets, and block Vanessa's attempts to claim spousal support, all while Ethan methodically began transferring the full weight of his inheritance into new, untouchable trusts under his sole control. The irony wasn't lost on him. Vanessa had left him because she believed he was broke, and now, because of that very decision, she would never see a dime of the fortune she had so desperately wanted. He could have told her the truth then, could have watched the shock twist her face when she realized her miscalculation, but he stayed silent, biding his time, because this wasn't just about revealing the money. It was about revealing her, about forcing her to confront the person she'd chosen to become. The lawyer's letters piled up, each one more frantic than the last as Vanessa's legal team, now realizing the Collins name still carried weight, scrambled to backtrack, to argue that their client had acted in haste, that perhaps reconciliation was still possible. But Ethan refused every overture, his resolve hardening with each passing day until finally the date was set. A closed-door mediation session, where the terms of the divorce would be finalized once and for all. He arrived early, dressed in a suit he hadn't worn since his parents' funeral, the weight of the documents in his briefcase a silent promise of the reckoning to come. Across the table, Vanessa sat perfectly poised, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. But Ethan didn't flinch, didn't waver, because for the first time in years he held all the power, and he was ready to use it. The mediation room was suffocatingly quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against Ethan's eardrums like a physical weight, broken only by the occasional rustle of papers or the sharp click of Vanessa's manicured nails against the polished mahogany table. She had dressed for the occasion, a tailored, cream-colored suit that screamed expensive neutrality, her blonde hair swept into a flawless chignon, lips painted the same shade of calculated red she'd worn at the funeral, as if she could still charm her way out of this, as if the right outfit might soften the blow of what was coming. Ethan studied her from across the table, his expression unreadable, his posture relaxed in a way that seemed almost careless, but beneath the surface his pulse thrummed with a quiet, simmering intensity. He had rehearsed this moment in his head 1,000 times, had lain awake at night turning over every possible way it could unfold, but now that it was here, he felt an eerie calm settle over him, the same focused clarity he imagined his father must have felt in the boardroom when closing a deal that would dismantle an opponent. The mediator, a gray-haired woman with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many marriages end this way, cleared her throat and began reciting the standard formalities. But Ethan barely heard her, his attention fixed on the way Vanessa's. Fingers twitched toward her phone, the way her knee bounced under the table, the barely there tremor in her voice when she insisted, yet again, that this divorce was unfortunate but necessary. Her lawyer, a slick-haired man with a too-tight collar, slid a revised settlement agreement across the table, his tone dripping with faux sympathy as he explained that Vanessa was willing to walk away cleanly in exchange for a modest lump sum. Just enough to start over. Ethan didn't touch the paper. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and withdrew a single, thick file, placing it deliberately in the center of the table before leaning back in his chair, his voice low and steady when he finally spoke. "Before we discuss what Vanessa wants," he said, "let's talk about what she's entitled to." Then he flipped the file open, revealing the first page, a notarized copy of the Collins family trust, its terms laid out in brutal, unassailable black and white. Vanessa's breath hitched. Her lawyer lunged for the document, his face draining of color as he scanned the text, his mouth opening and closing like a fish stranded on dry land. And Ethan just watched, his lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes, because this was the moment he'd been waiting for, the moment when Vanessa would realize, too late, that she'd gambled on the wrong man, and lost. Vanessa's carefully constructed facade crumbled in slow motion. First, her lips parted in disbelief as her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, then her manicured fingers clenched into fists so tight her knuckles turned bone white. And finally, the realization dawned in her widening eyes as she understood the magnitude of her miscalculation. The air in the room grew thick with tension, the mediator's pen hovering uselessly above her notepad as the truth settled over everyone. Present, Ethan wasn't the broke, desperate man Vanessa had abandoned at his parents' graveside. He was the sole inheritor of a fortune so vast it rendered her divorce demands laughable, and every legal maneuver she'd made now worked against her. Ethan watched with detached fascination as panic flickered across Vanessa's face, her usual composure unraveling thread by thread. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her gaze darting between the trust documents and Ethan's impassive expression, as if searching for some loophole, some way to salvage the situation. But there was none. Her lawyer, now sweating visibly, began stammering about misunderstandings and renegotiation. But Ethan merely slid another document forward, a prenuptial agreement Vanessa had signed years earlier, one she'd likely forgotten in her rush to escape what she thought was a sinking ship, its ironclad terms now ensuring she couldn't touch a cent of the Collins wealth. The room seemed to tilt then, the power dynamics shifting irrevocably as Vanessa's carefully plotted escape transformed into a gilded cage of her own making. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely recognizable, stripped of its usual polished confidence, reduced to something raw and desperate as she uttered the words Ethan had waited years to hear. "Ethan, please, we can work this out." But he didn't react, didn't so much as blink, because this wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a surrender, and he had no intention of offering terms. The mediator, sensing the tectonic shift, exhaled sharply and removed her glasses, her professional detachment slipping as she addressed Vanessa's lawyer with a tone of finality. "I think we're done here." And as Ethan stood to leave, the file tucked neatly back into his briefcase, he didn't glance back at the woman who'd once been his wife. There was nothing left to say, no parting words dramatic enough to match the poetic justice of the moment. The door clicked shut behind him with satisfying finality, the sound echoing down the empty hallway like the last note of a long-awaited symphony. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan's new penthouse, casting golden patterns across the polished hardwood floors as he stood sipping his coffee, gazing out at the city skyline that now stretched before him like a kingdom reclaimed. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. 6 months of legal battles that had ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, as Vanessa, stripped of any leverage and facing the cold reality of her miscalculations, had ultimately accepted. A settlement so meager it barely covered her legal fees. The media, ever hungry for scandal, had feasted on the story for weeks. The socialite who gambled wrong. The billionaire's revenge. But Ethan had refused interviews, declined comment, letting the facts speak for themselves as he quietly stepped into his new role as head of the Collins empire. His parents' legacy, once hidden from him as both protection and test, now flowed through his hands with the same meticulous care they'd always shown, their trust in him finally fulfilled. The penthouse was sparsely furnished still, a deliberate choice. He'd kept only what mattered, his father's antique globe, his mother's favorite painting, the simple wooden photo frame holding that last family portrait taken before everything changed. He ran his thumb over the frame's edge now, the glass cool beneath his fingertips, and realized with quiet surprise that the ache in his chest when he thought of them was different these days. Less sharp, more sweet, like sunlight after rain. The intercom buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts, and when the doorman announced his guest, Ethan smiled for what felt like the first time in years. Downstairs, waiting in the lobby with a bottle of wine and an unassuming smile, was Clara, the junior partner at his parents' law firm who'd helped David with the trust paperwork, the woman who'd slipped him her personal number after the final court hearing with a note that read, "For when you're ready to remember how to trust someone." He'd called her 3 weeks later, and over coffee that turned into dinner that turned into long walks through the city, he'd discovered something startling, the capacity to hope again. As he pressed the button to grant her access to the elevator, Ethan glanced one last time at the photo in his hands, at his parents' proud, loving faces, and whispered the words he knew they'd waited a lifetime to hear him say, "I'm okay." Then he set the frame gently on the shelf, straightened his shirt, and went to answer the door. Not as the man Vanessa had left, not as the son tragedy had forged, but as who he'd always been beneath it all. Ethan Collins, enough all on his own.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.